Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Chesapeake Bay National Estuarine Research Preserve in Virginia's virtual field trip experience. So since we're not able to offer those in-person experiences this fall, we thought it'd be a great idea to offer a virtual experience. And so we're going to go over a little background on what CBNERR Virginia is and what we do. We're going to talk a little bit about the Chesapeake Bay and what watersheds are, and a little bit about water quality parameters. Then after, we are going to go seining in the York River just outside of our office and do some habitat cage exploration. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the Chesapeake Bay National Estuarine Research Preserve in Virginia, we are located in Gloucester Point on the banks of the York River, and we are one of 29 sites that are located throughout the United States. And we are part of the National Estuarine Research Preserve system. And we do focus on the education aspect. We focus on research, stewardship, and coastal training. And all of this has helped to promote the management and conservation of estuarine systems that are located local to our area. So what is an estuary? So estuaries, there's many definitions out there. We like to say it's where rivers meet the sea. So when you have that river water, which is fresh water, meeting seawater, you have what we call brackish water. And usually that is right in the middle of salinity. So salinity we will talk about in a little bit, but we're having brackish water, so a mix of fresh and salt. Estuaries provide a lot for species. So they can provide food. So some snails will climb up all this cordgrass that's located in marshes and estuaries and consume it. A lot of species will use it for shelter. And a lot of migratory birds use estuaries as basically stopover points during their migratory patterns. Estuaries can also act as nurseries for many species, and since they are located on shorelines, they do help a lot with buffering the mainland from, a large storm bringing in a lot of flooding. So they do a great job of protecting shorelines. And the Chesapeake Bay is pretty unique because it's the largest estuary system located in the United States, so it's pretty special. So the Chesapeake Bay is home to over 3,600 species. So that's not just animals, that's plants and animals. So that's still pretty impressive. And we have thousands of miles of coastline within the Chesapeake Bay. So that shows you how massive that system is. What makes the Chesapeake Bay unique from other estuarine systems is we have oyster reefs. So oysters are a very iconic species here in the Chesapeake Bay. And we also have beautiful seagrass beds that are located on the bottom of the bay. So we have some pictured in the lower left-hand corner. You guys can see that beautiful seagrass. The Chesapeake Bay also provides a lot of food for people. So blue crabs and oysters are commonly harvested in the Chesapeake Bay for people to consume. It provides a lot of jobs for people. So the watermen are the ones going out catching these species for people to consume later on. And then it also provides a lot of recreational activities for people. So boating, kayaking, fishing, tons of ways that we can really enjoy the Chesapeake Bay. So now that we've talked about what an estuary is, we are going to talk about what a watershed is. And watersheds are areas of land where all tributaries drain to a common outlet. And most of the time that's going to be the mouth of a river or mouth of a bay, and that eventually will lead down to the ocean. So the Chesapeake Bay watershed, we talked about the Chesapeake Bay estuary being so large, but the watershed itself is pretty massive too. There are 5 main rivers that drain into the Chesapeake Bay from further inland, the York being one of them. There are over 17 million people that live within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So most likely, if you're watching this, you are one of those people that lives within this watershed. And there are 6 states that are part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So that just shows you on what a large scale this watershed covers. And because we are such a massive watershed, the bay can face a lot of issues that happen further inland. And some of those issues might be pollution, stormwater runoff, but Most of the time that is going to be regulated by a lot of organizations. So that's what CBNERR is here to do, is we really want to make sure that our estuarine systems are staying as well protected as possible and educating people about the issues of the bay so they don't become issues in the future. But today we are going to be exploring the York River. So that is located right outside of our office. We are located on the Virginia Institute of Marine Science campus. And so it's pretty unique that this river is located just outside, so we're able to really hone in on a lot of research and a lot of exploration within the York River. And as I mentioned, it's one of those 5 rivers that drain right into the Chesapeake Bay, so we're not far away from the Chesapeake Bay here in Gloucester Point. It's also considered a very historic area. So just across the river is where Yorktown is located. So it's a Revolutionary War monument and battlefield. So the York River doesn't just have a lot of ecological importance, but it does have a lot of historical importance as well. Normally on our field trips, we like to talk about water quality. And there are 3 water quality parameters I do want to touch on. And these are ones we usually work with students quite a bit on. So temperature, pretty simple when we think about how you measure it with a thermometer. Here we use what is called a YSI. So that's located right here. You might be able to see it. It's a long device that gets submerged in the water. And that YSI has multiple probes, and each one of those probes measures a certain water quality parameter, one being temperature. And temperature can change over time, especially seasonally. It can change with currents and storms, so it's really important that we monitor temperature as much as possible. The next water quality parameter we measure is salinity, and salinity is how salty water is. So I mentioned how the ocean is very, very salty, and freshwater rivers have no salt in them. But what makes estuaries so unique is that we have a mix of both. So we have right in the middle a good amount of salt within our system. And we use a YSI that has a probe that measures salinity, but we also use a refractometer, which is located in the upper left-hand corner. So what we'll do is we'll drop a droplet of water on the refractometer, and you point it up towards light, so whether it be the sun outside or a ceiling light inside, and you're able to get a reading that way. And usually here on the York River, we're seeing somewhere between 12, 15 parts per thousand to maybe around 22 parts per thousand, where in the ocean, we're seeing 30 to 35 parts per thousand. And of course, in a river, or a freshwater river, it should be 0 parts per thousand, so no salt at all. And then finally, we like to talk about turbidity. So that is how murky your water is. And again, we can use a YSI, but we can also use something called a Secchi disc, and that's located in the lower left-hand corner. So that is a round disc, and it's split into 4 quadrats where it has black and white alternating, and they'll lower that into the water until it completely disappears, and that can get the reading that they're looking for. So it's a very simple way to measure turbidity, and it's a way we like to use it with our students. But again, a more accurate reading is going to come from that YSI, since it has a specific probe just for turbidity. And turbidity is extremely important because we have those seagrasses, and we want light to be able to penetrate down through the water to reach those seagrasses. So if it's too murky, our seagrasses can face a lot of problems. So now that we've given you guys a really great background on where we're located, what we do, and some of the activities we like to do on our field trips, we are going to head outside to the York River, and we're going to do some seining and some fish identification.
Okay, so we are now on the banks of the York River, where we're going to be doing some seining this morning. And so seining is something that we do to really look at the biodiversity of an area. So sometimes we'll do it on the York River, sometimes we go a little further north to Newport, Virginia. There's a lot of diversity there. But how we seine is using a seine net. So these come in various sizes. This one's pretty small, but it's a good size for the York. And what will happen is we roll this out and you have one person on each pole. And you'll walk a good distance out, and you definitely want to do this at a lower tide so it's not up to your shoulders. And you will pull the net evenly, so at the same time, towards the beach. And on this net, you'll notice at the top there are these buoys, so that helps to keep the net afloat. And on the bottom of the net, there's some chains and some weights, and so that allows the net to drag along the sandy bottom. So as you're seining and moving towards the beach, you are capturing various animal species within your net. So when we do get to the beach, we actually leave the net a little bit in the water. We don't want to harm any of these animals. And so as we're IDing them, we keep them in water with a bubbler to keep that oxygen going for them. And then we will re-release them back into the York River. So we'll get seining.
Hey everyone, I'm Matthew, and I'm going to be going over the species that we caught today out here on the York River. And we didn't catch too much, but we caught a few things. So I'll start with our invertebrates, meaning they have no backbone. And one invertebrate that we caught, I think it's our only one, was the blue crab. So this is a juvenile blue crab, and it is a female. As you can see right here, this is her apron, the little triangle that goes right there. And she's a juvenile female because her apron goes up like a little triangle, kind of similar to a male would look. And as she matures, her apron will become more rounded and more circular right there. So this is a juvenile spadefish. As you can see, it's really dark. And as they mature, they'll be white with these black lines down them. And they usually spawn out this time of the year, August to September. We'll catch lots of them, and they get bigger actually as we catch them. So in another month, they'd probably be like this big. So they grow pretty fast when they're juveniles. This is a sand mullet, and it's a type of drum. It's in the drum family, like a croaker or like a red drum or black drum. It's a bottom fish. You can see its mouth is on its bottom, and it has little whiskers that it would use to feel the bottom with. And you can see they have a really defined lateral line that goes down their body. That's the line that really stands out right here. This next one is a killifish, and you can tell them by any other minnow because there's stripes on them. And the males will have stripes that are up and down, and the females will have the sideways stripes. And this is about as big as they get. They're a type of minnow. They're like a mummy chog, if you've ever seen one. So this is a seahorse. It's actually the line seahorse. You can see all the little pieces off of his body. That's what they use to blend in to eelgrass and to different types of grasses underwater. And we usually catch quite a few this time of the year. And the males will actually give birth to the babies. And the female will lay her eggs in the male's brood pouch, and he'll fertilize them and actually release them into the water once they are matured enough to leave his pouch. So this little guy right here, this is a pipefish, and they're related to the seahorse. So they're pretty much just a straight seahorse. And they look similar to eelgrass, and that's what they live in, is eelgrass. And just like the seahorses, the males will actually give birth to the babies. The female will lay their eggs in his brood pouch, and he'll release them. So this is an American eel, and this is a juvenile, probably a year or two old, and they're really slimy, so that's why I really can't hold them. And these guys do not have any scales. All they have on them is slime, and no, they cannot electrocute, like some people think. You can see right here by his face, he has a little red mark, and that's actually a little parasite that's coming off of his gill. I don't know if you can see, but right under my finger. And you can see that he looks just like a little snake in the water with his dorsal fin right here going along. Hey everyone, so this is our second part of our field trip today, and this is what we normally do. We'll go seining, and then we'll come back inside the lab and do a little lab activity, and this is called our habitat cage activity. And what we do, we have these cages that are set outside in the water. We keep them there all year, And we usually fill them halfway with oyster shells, and then we put them overboard. And oyster spats, the baby oysters that swim around after they spawn, will actually go to the shells and stick to them and start growing little habitats, oyster reefs. And oyster reefs are very important for our environment for different reasons. One being that they create a habitat for other animals to live in, and to help clean the water. An oyster can clean up to 50 gallons of water per day, which is a lot of water for one little oyster, but that big to clean. So the more habitat cages we have out there, the more little habitats we can have for other animals and for our water to be better. So right here we have the eastern oyster, and as you can see, it's the whole oyster right here. And there's actually a couple on the bottom, so those are juvenile oysters. And what we have is oysters are bivalves, and that meaning two shells. So they are non-symmetrical bivalves, unlike a clam. A clam is a symmetrical bivalve, meaning both shells are the same. And oysters are built like cup shape. So the bottom of the shell is usually one big cup, and the top is covering the cup. So inside this cup right here, between their top shell and bottom shell, they have their soft body, which is usually about as big. This is probably as big as their body is. And they have two siphons that come out when they're in the water. One siphon's in water, the other one spits it out. As we said previously, they can take in about 50 gallons of water per day, and that helps with the cleanliness of the water. So one thing that people usually think, that there's not a lot of oysters. There's not as many as there used to be, but they are coming back over time. And one problem is that a lot of oysters have is disease. A big problem is like dermo, and there's a couple other diseases that kill them in higher salinity waters. So some people like to take oysters from the James River and move them to different rivers. And the reason that is the James River is an awesome seed river where oysters grow up. They start small there and they grow, so people take them from there and move them. And the problem with that is the James River is a more freshwater river, it's a less salinity. And when they move them, if they move them to saltier water, that disease there just kills the oysters really bad because they're not used to that disease that's in the higher salinity water. So that's one problem that we have with oysters, and that's why over time they've become more prone to the disease because they have been exposed to it for a longer period of time. We catch a couple fish on the oyster reef, and this is one of them. This is a striped blenny, and it is a fish that loves living in oyster reefs. And usually they'll live in the oyster shells and lay their eggs in there and protect them. So when an oyster dies, it opens its shell just a little bit like that, and they'll actually go in, lay their eggs, and just sit in there until they hatch, so nothing eats them. A grass shrimp, and they live in grass beds and oyster beds. So you can see he's walking around. They can live out of water. They do not need water to live, but they need to keep their gills wet. One thing is this is a female. I can tell by on her bottom, see that black stuff right there? Those are her eggs. And she uses them, her little appendages right there, to fan her eggs out as they mature. And this one's probably about to release her eggs pretty soon because they're pretty dark. And usually the darker their eggs are, the bigger their eye spot is, and meaning that they're gonna hatch soon.